China hosts Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin for a pageant of power and a show of military force, and the president responds.
I understood the reason they were doing it, and they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching.
I'm Georgia Howe with Daily Wire executive editor John Bickley. It's Thursday, September 4th, and this is Morning Wire.
Free speech activists are sounding the alarm after the arrest of an Irish comedian over his social media comments.
This could happen to any American man or woman that goes to Heathrow that has said things online that the British government and British police don't like.
And following the crime crackdown in D.C., Trump says he's ready to send in federal muscle where it's wanted most.
We're going to be going to maybe Louisiana, and you have New Orleans, which has a crime problem. But we could straighten out Chicago. All they have to do is ask us.
Thanks for waking up with Morning Wire. Stay tuned. We have the news you need to know.
America is built on hard work and powered by American energy. Chevron has spent $44 billion with local businesses across all 50 states since 2022, fueling infrastructure and communities, all while strengthening local economies. Last year, Chevron increased U.S. production nearly 20%, powering communities and businesses from the heartlands to the coasts. We're helping to fuel America's energy advantage, building a brighter future right here at home. Visit chevron.com/America to discover more.
China hosted a record-setting military parade on Wednesday, displaying new age weapons and deepening ties with American adversaries.
Daily Wire senior editor Cabot Phillips has more on what it means for the global balance of power and how Donald Trump is reacting. So, Cabot, we reported earlier this week there's an enormous summit happening in China with some of our adversaries. What's the latest?
Right. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has been hosting the leaders of 26 Asian and Middle Eastern countries this week, including Vladimir Putin and even North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And for the grand finale on Wednesday, Xi flexed his country's growing military arsenal with one of the largest military parades in world history. Tens of thousands of troops marched through Tiananmen Square. But more importantly, the Chinese publicly flaunted all sorts of advanced weaponry, some of it for the very first time. Among those weapons were hypersonic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, long-range drones, stealth fighters, and laser-powered anti-drone systems. The event, which came on the 80th anniversary of China's victory over Japan in World War II, culminated with a big speech from Xi that turned quite a few heads in the West.
What was the gist of his speech?
Well, the speech was littered with allusions to World War II, as Xi, who wore a gray Mao-style suit, sort of tried to tie the modern Communist Party in with Chinese leaders of the past. Throughout the afternoon, he painted the Chinese Communist Party as the savior of the people, warding off imperialist threats, and that victory in World War II only came because, in his words, quote, the Chinese people united against the enemy and rose up to resist. And that theme was no coincidence. Xi continually played up the sacrifice of past generations to establish China as a global power, and then hinted that it would be necessary once again, saying, quote, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is unstoppable. But for his part, President Trump made sure to remind Xi that the United States played a critical role in defeating Japan. Here he is from the White House on Wednesday.
We helped China very much, as you know, when they talk about freedom. And I don't believe that, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe that America, that the United States was acknowledged for helping China to gain its freedom.
And then Trump added on social media that, quote, the big question to be answered is whether or not Xi will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States gave to China in order to help it secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader.
Now, what is the purpose of the parade and this ongoing summit?
So there's a few parts. First, from a military standpoint, this is China flexing its muscles as a sort of warning to any country who might try to stop them from expanding their influence across the East. The Chinese have doubled their military spending in the last decade and are widely presumed to be laying the groundwork for an invasion of Taiwan. Now, Xi did not explicitly mention Taiwan by name, but did speak of the, quote, rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. That is a phrase that they use repeatedly to talk about the takeover of Taiwan in the future. In response, though, Taiwan's president struck a defiant tone to the parade, saying, quote, Taiwan does not commemorate peace with the barrel of a gun. But more broadly, this entire summit and this whole week really was an effort by Xi to cement China's ties with Russia and other Eastern nations, while also playing the part of unifier on the global stage. Xi is intent on creating this so-called new global order where China is the key player. But again, for his part, President Trump made clear that he was not intimidated, sort of taunting Xi on social media, writing, quote, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America." So again, taunting him. And one final nugget here worth mentioning. At one point during the ceremony, a hot mic picked up a simply remarkable conversation between Xi and Putin, where they talked about the potential for human immortality. According to translators, Putin could be heard saying, quote, "With the development of biotechnology, human organs can be continuously transplanted and people can live younger and younger and even achieve immortality." To which Xi told Putin, quote, "This century, there is also a chance of living to 150.
Very dystopian. Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Cabot, thanks for reporting.
Absolutely.
The arrest of Irish comedy writer Graham Linehan over X posts has thrust European speech laws into the spotlight. The House held a hearing yesterday on how these laws could threaten Americans.
Here with the details is Daily Wire culture reporter Megan Basham. Hey, Megan. So first, what are the European speech laws in question here, and how can they impact the U.S.?
Yes. So the key law in question here is the Digital Services Act, and that was enacted in the EU back in 2022. Essentially, it's a sweeping regulation that holds online platforms accountable for any content that the EU deems harmful. Now, it requires American tech companies like Meta and Google to police so-called hate speech and disinformation, or else they face massive fines, up to 6% of their global revenue, and an additional penalty in daily fines. Now, the UK, which is no longer part of the EU, enacted a very similar law back in 2023, and that's called the Online Safety Act. And also an older law from 1986 is also being used to curb speech that, quote unquote, stirs up hatred. So critics, including U.S. lawmakers, are saying that these laws amount to a censorship regime whose impact goes far beyond Europe's borders. This was Jim Jordan during that House hearing on Wednesday, referencing an EU commissioner who threatened Elon Musk in 2024 that if his interview with then candidate President Trump should fall afoul of that Digital Services Act, they might take action.
He's threatening an American running an American company about an interview regarding the most important election we have, election of President of the United States.
So the upshot here is that to avoid the threats and penalties coming from the Digital Services Act, you will often see companies like Meta and Google simply adopt a broad blanket global policy. So essentially exporting censorship to the United States.
All right, so what happens overseas doesn't stay overseas in this case.
Exactly. No, it doesn't.
And how does the arrest of comedian Graham Linehan play into all this?
Well, I think the really important thing to remember here is that Linehan is an Irish citizen. And yet, when he landed in London's Heathrow Airport, he was met by armed police who arrested him for posts on X about the transgender movement. And this was back in April when he was in the United States. So he didn't even write these posts when he was in the UK. Now, the most controversial of the posts said, quoting here, "If a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent, abusive act. Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls." Now, Linehan says that this was a joke, but British authorities say that he was inciting violence. So during his testimony before the House, Nigel Farage, who is, of course, leader of the Reform UK party, said that Americans need to know that they could also be arrested under this same law.
It is a potentially big threat to tech bosses, to many, many others. At what point did we become North Korea? Well, I think the Irish comedy writer found that out 2 days ago at Heathrow Airport.
Now, I do want to add that British authorities seem to be getting a little bit embarrassed about some of the attention that this arrest is bringing from the rest of the world. London's police chief said that his officers are in an impossible situation and that they shouldn't be expected to police toxic culture wars. And he also said that these laws either need to be changed or clarified. And then Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that we must ensure police focus on the most serious issues.
All right, so some sort of chinks in the censorship armor in the UK, it seems like, are forming there. Now, Linehan was not arrested over this EU act that the House was debating. Have we seen that act applied in similar circumstances?
Yes, very much. So Lorcan Price, who is an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom International, spoke before the House about some of the cases that they've been involved in that related to this Digital Services Act.
In Finland, our client, Päivi Räsänen, a member of parliament, is now in year 5 of a prosecution for simply posting a verse from scripture on Twitter. Our client, Rose Doherty in Scotland, a 74-year-old grandmother, was arrested by offering to have consensual conversations for people. Adam Smith-Connor, an army veteran, was prosecuted for praying silently in his head in England. German pensioners are having their homes raided and are being prosecuted for insulting politicians. Indeed, one member of the Green Party in Germany has over 700 criminal complaints outstanding for insult.
Now, in the meantime, the Trump administration is taking action. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has ordered diplomats to lobby EU nations to repeal the Digital Services Act. And Reuters is reporting that Trump is weighing sanctions on EU officials who enforce these speech laws.
Well, the White House has been quite vocal about the issue of censorship in Europe, particularly as it impacts Americans and American companies. Megan, thanks so much for reporting.
My pleasure.
In a move that may have surprised some, President Trump won't rule out dispatching federal troops to red states.
Daily Wire reporter Tim Pierce is here to discuss the latest on the president's efforts to use federal resources to fight local crime. So, Tim, this is going to be surprising for some people. Where is he looking to send troops?
Yeah, President Trump may decide to send troops somewhere where they're actually wanted. Here's the president on Wednesday suggesting he may send troops down to New Orleans.
Washington, D.C. is a totally safe city. You're not reporting any crime because there is none. They said crime is down 87%, and I said, no, it's not. It's down 100%. We have a great thing going. I could do that with Chicago. We could do that with New York. We could do it with Los Angeles. So we're making a determination now. Do we go to Chicago or do we go to a place like New Orleans where we have a great governor, Jeff Landry, who wants us to come in and straighten out a very nice section of this country that's become quite tough, quite bad.
Over in Illinois, Governor Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson have said that they don't want Trump involved at all. Here's Governor Pritzker saying that Trump is wrong about crime in the city.
Just during the last week, I've been in neighborhoods across Chicago, from Bronzeville to South Shore to Chatham to Little Village. The president's absurd characterizations do not match what is happening on the ground here. He has no idea what he's talking about. There is no emergency that warrants deployment of troops.
Chicago, of course, just wrapped up its Labor Day weekend, and it was the most violent holiday weekend in the city of the summer. 9 dead and 52 wounded in the final tally. Of course, this is not unusual for a place like Chicago. The city has struggled with gun violence for decades. Earlier this year, on the weekend of July 4th, 6 people were killed and 49 people were shot.
Yet even despite that, they don't want any assistance with their law enforcement?
Yeah, they're fighting this in the courts. And as Cabot reported yesterday, blue cities have a little more legal protection after a federal judge ruled on Tuesday against Trump's use of troops in California. Judge Charles Breyer is a Clinton appointee on the federal district court in San Francisco. He said Trump illegally used Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles earlier this year when rioters were attacking federal law enforcement for enforcing immigration policies. Breyer said that Trump deployed the National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles, ostensibly to quell a rebellion and ensure that federal immigration laws were enforced. But, he continued, there was no rebellion, nor was civilian law enforcement unable to respond to the protests and enforce the law. The judge said that Trump violated the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, which limits the use of military to enforce domestic law. But Trump should still be able to call in troops for narrow purposes, such as protecting federal buildings. And all this comes as so-called street takeovers seem to be making a comeback. As criminal justice expert Peter Moscas explained to Fox News, youths have begun to take over streets and neighborhoods to terrorize the locals. And they act this way because they don't have any fear of being apprehended or stopped by law enforcement. We've seen this happen recently in places like Los Angeles and Charlotte, North Carolina, though in Charlotte, nearly 100 people were arrested after the incident.
Now, how is all of this landing with the constituents in these blue cities? Obviously, most of these people don't like Trump, but at the same time, people don't like crime. So is there a risk for these mayors and governors to reject some of this help?
There could be. If Trump is able to use federal resources to solve these persistent crime issues in red states where he has more latitude to work, then you could see grassroots pressure begin to form in some of these blue areas and force blue state leaders to work with the president. You already have officials such as Illinois Congresswoman Mary Miller calling Pritzker a hypocrite over his complaints about Trump's help.
Just last year, J.B. Pritzker was completely on board with letting the National Guard come in to protect his buddies at the DNC. Why will he not protect the citizens that live in Chicago, protect the businesses and the visitors?
So we'll see how Chicagoans react to all this.
And potentially New Orleans as well. Tim, thanks for reporting.
Good to be on.
Thanks for waking up with us. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be back this evening with more news you need to know.